All right, welcome everyone to another edition of Grid Down Live Q&A. So, man, there is a ton of stuff happening in the world today. This is probably the closest, in my opinion, that we've ever been to a grid down scenario in the U.S. May not be the entire nation, but I believe that it's very likely in the near future, if Russia does go into Ukraine, that we will have a grid down in at least certain major cities in the U.S. I'm going to kind of get a little bit further in depth on that subject and discuss that. First of all, if you haven't seen my recent videos and a lot of my recent posts discussing the Ukrainian and Russian conflict, we've almost kind of forgot about China and Taiwan, huh? It's kind of just been pushed off to the side with everything that's been happening. So I want to circle back to that real quick because yesterday in an interview with NPR, the Chinese ambassador to the U.S. straight out announced a possible military conflict with the U.S. over Taiwan, and he issued an explicit warning to the U.S. about Taiwan, about not getting involved. And I have kind of predicted multiple times that if Russia does decide to go into Ukraine, there is a very good likelihood that China will use all the chaos that's happening with Russia and Ukraine. China will use that opportunity to go into Taiwan. So that is something that we definitely need to keep an eye on. So the recent comments yesterday from the Chinese ambassador kind of reinforced that. And the one exception to that would be is the Olympics are happening in China here next week, and I don't think they're going to do anything during the Olympics. So we've seen China and Russia work together a lot militarily. They're combining their space programs. They're really playing footsie, and they're getting closer and closer, which is really bad for the U.S., right? If they were separate on the world stage geopolitically, that's good for us. If they start combining forces and getting closer and closer, that's not good news for the U.S. So it is possible that Putin may wait till after I don't know, I'm just guessing here, but Putin and China may be talking behind closed doors. Putin may wait till after the Olympics because China probably doesn't want Russia going into Ukraine and taking away from all the hubbub over the Olympics in China and all the money they've spent on that. And it would just cause a lot of interference with the Olympic Games in China. So I wouldn't be surprised if Putin does hold off for 3 or 4 more weeks till the Olympics are over, but who knows? Who knows with Putin? But with that said, so if you didn't get a chance to watch my interview with Dr. Peter Pry last week, it was 2 Fridays ago that I posted. You can watch it on YouTube. Watching these things unfold with Russia and Ukraine and seeing how all the different pieces were falling together, man, I really had some concerns. And Dr. Peter Pry is probably the best guy to talk to about that. And we made a lot of predictions and I shouldn't say predictions. We were saying, hey, this is how this could play out, it's likely to play out. And we're literally watching it over the last 2 weeks, the news stories, literally watching exactly what we were discussing play out right before our very eyes. So I'm going to try and do a quick recap on the scenario and what's happening there. Obviously, if you're not living in a box, you know that Putin has amassed 150,000 troops now, I think, on the border of Ukraine, and the U.S. is kind of saying at any minute that Russia forces could invade Ukraine. In response to that, the Biden administration has said, hey, if you guys attack Ukraine, we're going to put huge economic sanctions alongside NATO on your country and make it very difficult for your country if you decide to try and annex Ukraine and go in there. But the thing that he did that just blew my mind, Biden sent U.S. cyber warfare teams to Ukraine to bolster Ukraine's cyber defenses and their cyber capabilities. I'm not saying we shouldn't have done that, but we sure as heck shouldn't have put it out in the media saying, hey, we're sending U.S. cyber warfare teams into Ukraine to help them, okay? And a week after that, I think it was January 19th press conference, he made some comments about like, hey, if Russia increases their cyber attacks on the Ukraine, we have the ability to use cyber attacks in Russia. And he said this back in April last year when there was heightened tensions between Russia and Ukraine. He said it after the SolarWinds hack. He straight up has said, we're going to go after the SolarWinds hack. I'm paraphrasing here. Well, if you continue this, we have the ability to take down parts of your electric grid and do massive cyber attacks in Russia. I mean, why are we telegraphing that? That just, so all those points of data lead up to the fact that the future warfare, and I've discussed this at length, is warfare in the electromagnetic spectrum, right? Is warfare of infrastructures and warfare of critical infrastructure in countries, because it's extremely vulnerable and you can cause an extreme amount of damage to a country by taking out their critical infrastructure for their military and their civilian populations. So we know that when Russia gets ready to invade Ukraine, they will, nobody really denies this fact, they will take down the Ukrainian power grids, or they'll go after their government and military computers, their military systems. The Russians built a lot of the Ukrainian electric grid. It's built with Russian parts. So before they send their first troop in, they're going to use cyber attacks against Ukraine. They took down Ukraine's grid in Kiev here a couple years ago. It's just something that's in the playbook, right? It's in the future playbook. Why would you send your troops in if you can completely black out, blind your enemy, take down their communications networks before you go in to fight a war? You really hamstring their ability to defend their country. And on that note, Ukraine, in a ground war against Russia, they have no chance. Everybody knows this. There's no way that Ukraine can win a ground war if Russia does decide to invade Ukraine. And what I and Dr. Peter Pry were discussing 2 Fridays ago is the only retaliation that they have is to, if Russia decides to come in and does cyber attacks in Ukraine and they start sending their troops in and flying planes into Ukrainian territory, their only response is going to be cyber attacks against the Russian homeland. They can go after the power grid in Moscow or some other highly populated areas in Russia and destroy infrastructure in Russia, in the Russian homeland, and really cause damage to Russia and their ability to resupply and things like this. That's really that's going to be their main avenue of defending themselves. And over the course of the last 2 weeks, we've kind of started to see more articles discussing this concept. And Dr. Peter Pry, right after our interview, I think it was on Tuesday, 2 weeks ago, put out a fantastic article, which I linked to. Again, everybody should check that out, on this exact subject. The problem is, and here's the whole point of all this, if, or I should say when, because it just happened yesterday, or at least the first volley, when Ukraine does attack Russia, at this point, we have our cyber warfare team sitting on the computer terminal right next to the Ukrainians. We have threatened to go after Russian infrastructure. To think that Putin is not going to ascribe cyber attacks in Russia to US, to the United States, and say, hey, you, America, are responsible for our grids coming down in Russia, or our pipelines blowing up, or this or that. And I've seen some talking heads in the media throughout the course the last couple of weeks saying, Russia knows better than to hit the U.S. Do they really? Is Putin scared? If we are responsible, or even if we didn't press the button, our guys are there, there's attribution to the U.S. If infrastructure in Russia starts getting hit, does any reasonable person think that Putin's not going to hit the U.S. homeland? So on that subject, this goes back to last April. And I discussed this back last April when this person said it. Putin's mouthpiece, what's her name? Sorry, give me 1 second here. So Putin's mouthpiece basically came out, and it's this woman that has very close ties to the Biden administration, and she's kind of considered the mouthpiece for Russian propaganda. And she came out last April during the Ukrainian and the kind of the buildup they had 6 months ago, and she said, sorry, this is the problem with going live. I had this highlighted and then I took it off. I want to quote her directly. Oh, okay, Margarita Simeon, and she said, "I do not believe that this will be a large-scale hot war." She's talking about the war that would eventually end up between the U.S. and Russia if they decided to invade Ukraine and then we got involved. She said, "This would not be a large-scale hot war like World War II, and I do not believe that there will be a long Cold War. It will be a war of the third type, the cyber war." She continued, "In conventional war, we could defeat Ukraine in 2 days, but it will be another kind of war. And we'll do it. And then the U.S. will respond by turning off power in a Russian city." She goes on to postulate that Moscow would then respond, and she said that with a flip of a switch, blacking out the state of Florida or blacking out New York Harlem area. And she insinuated that the American analysts and the specialists are incompetent and stupid in regards to the subject, and that Russia could easily defeat the U.S. in a cyber war. So these are comments directly from Russia, and there's other comments that other Russian outlets have made in this same regard. The Russians are not scared of a cyber war against the U.S. They're just not. This idea that if we start playing games in their country with their critical infrastructure, that they're not going to hit us here is just, it's foolhardy. And then what was it, 4 days ago, the DHS released a statement stating, "We assess that Russia would consider initiating a cyber attack against the homeland if it perceived a U.S. or NATO response to a possible Russian invasion of Ukraine and it threatened its long-term national security, and that Russia's threshold for conducting disruptive and destructive cyber attacks in the U.S. homeland probably remains very high." This was a warning DHS sent out to electric utility companies and but some of the security groups out there. So DHS is warning about this, right? So all these tensions are building up of a cyber war against the U.S. and Russia over this Ukrainian conflict. And then yesterday, the article, Vice released an article. They spoke with a couple NATO cyber warfare type people. They wouldn't name them, so basically what happened is 2 days ago, Ukrainian hacker groups that are loosely affiliated with the Ukrainian government shut down and hacked into the state railway computer system in Belarus, which is where Russia is using to kind of amass their hardware and then ship it into the areas around Ukraine through Belarus. And so this hacker group took down a bunch of the computer systems for this railway system to kind of stall their ability to bring more tanks. And it wasn't a major attack, but the point of it is, well, Russia, first off, they've denied any link between them and this group. It was apparently an operation conducted independently by opposition activists who once worked in the country's well-respected computer science community. So this is a group of hackers that used to be part of the Ukrainian state's cyber warfare teams and have broken off. And that's how Ukraine is known for corruption, and that's how a lot of their hacking stuff works. It's not just their state cyber warfare teams, the Ukrainian state. They have a lot of, let's call them individual hacking groups that loosely work with the Ukrainian government. And part of that is they can deny attribution to their state directly. Not that that'll work going forward, but NATO intelligence officials, and I'm going to link to the story once this is over, but NATO intelligence officials said, in discussing this cyber attack, he said, in Russia, what do you want turned off? Like basically speaking to Russia, what do you want turned off? He said, how hard do you think it would be for the world's best hackers, backed up by a major state, us, How hard do you think it would be for the world's best hackers, backed up by a major state, to wreck Russia's cyber infrastructure, black everything out, and get people killed in accidents? Continue. The second intelligence person that they talked to said, while Russia can't protect their own systems, they certainly can strike back, and this is why such operations become far above my level. The political question now is the value versus the risk of retaliation. And so the article ended like this, and the other comment was, in Ukraine there will be some coordination, but if the country comes under invasion, we'd expect them to be very aggressive in attacking Russian homeland systems, and the Russians attacking back. In a brief interview, a Ukrainian intelligence official who works in cyber activities confirmed that Ukraine had planned responses to any eventual Russian invasion. He said, quote, there's always endless kinetic activity between Ukraine and Russia. It's an ongoing battlefield. So if the ground war escalates, we will escalate in the cyber realm. And he said, but so will the Russians. But we think we can hurt them in ways they have yet to understand. So this is Dr. Peter Pryor and I were talking about this. Nobody in media was talking about this 2 weeks ago, and this is what we were discussing. This is going to escalate into cyber war. And Biden is taking part in this, and he's actually promoting it. I just don't know if the current administration, they don't understand that the Russians have been inside of our critical infrastructure in the cyber realm for, 15 years now? There's been covering this for 10 years now, talking about how the Russians have been infiltrating our critical infrastructure. They have the ability at any point in time to take the lights down in this country. So where is all this heading? I am not a prophet. I am not going to sit here and say this is going to happen, this is going to happen, this is going to happen. I'm going to say highly likely when Russia invades Ukraine, Ukraine is going to respond. They've already said they are, to Russia directly. DHS has already warned that it's likely if that happens, Russia's going to blame the US, and Russia, if infrastructure in Russia starts blacking out, they will hit the US homeland. Now, I think this is going to be something that grows, and there's different type of cyber destruction that can happen. I think the first volley, like if we start blacking out cities over there through software means, they could, like the Putin advisor mentioned, they could take out the state of Florida, Harlem, New York City. They could hit a couple cities in the US and take down the power grids through software. That's through embedded malware and different programs that they have in the critical infrastructure programs. But that is the key question, is where does it go from there? So Ukraine's going to attack Russia's infrastructure. That's a given. It's highly likely that Russia's going to retaliate on the US for that. And they're not going to just automatically start nuclear war. I'm not jumping to that level. But I do highly anticipate at some point in the near future, we could see multiple cities or even a state or two in the US losing their electric grid and through software. And so it's going to take the computer nerds with their glasses to come in there, and it may take them 5 or 6 days to fix this, right? And then you start comparing that to, so what does that look like, right? And people will compare that to New Orleans and Hurricane Katrina, right? Well, look, this happened, they lost power, this disaster happened. But with Hurricane Katrina, that was an event that we knew 5 days in advance that it was coming, it was going to happen. FEMA had a week's notice to get food and resources and get ready to go in there and save the New Orleans people, a city of less than a million people. And most of those people had left. They had been warned to leave. I don't know exactly how many people stayed behind, but you can watch the video in the aftermath of Hurricane Katrina and the Superdome and all the crazy stuff that happened. And it took us 2 days just to get basic food and water to the Superdome. And that's with advance notice. If Putin takes out one of our major cities or a couple of our major cities or a state, it could be a significant time till the rest of the country can gather enough resources to come in and help out, right? And get you food and water. It's February right now. There's a huge cold snap. I mean, could you imagine no heat in your house for a week? Grocery stores being closed, gas stations not functioning, banks not functioning. And now we're not talking about a single city. What if they did black out the state of Florida, like she mentioned? That's 18 million people. That's 18 million people across, I think it's 66,000 acres in Florida. How do you react to that? There's going to be, the American people don't understand what's coming, right? Now, with cyber attacks in the software domain and the systems, they didn't destroy any of the hardware, right? So I was mentioning the computer nerds coming in there, and no offense to computer nerds, but coming in there and fixing these systems and getting them back up online within a week or two, okay? But what happens after that? How do we retaliate? There's been no mention in this in the media about, like, what are the next steps? Where does this go? If they hit us, are we going to hit them harder? Is Biden going to say, well, they took out Atlanta and Seattle and DC, so we're going to hit these cities, right? And then that's how wars start, and cyber wars. And there's been very little discussion on what a cyber war would look like in the military and the analysts areas. And what if Biden or Putin has the ability to actually destroy hardware? So it's one thing to take a system offline through binary means, but you can actually destroy parts of the electric grid. You can destroy through SCADA equipment, and you can not so much take it offline, you can destroy it. And at that point, we're not counting days or a week before we get electric systems back online. You can be talking weeks or months. And I've discussed this at length in my books and what that looks like. Does this go back and forth? How far does it go? A lot of people dismiss the EMP threat. I mean, as far as the talking heads and the security analysts on CNN and Fox and stuff, they dismiss the EMP threat because, oh, that's a nuclear weapon. But you can go to the EMP Commission's 2017 report on foreign views on EMP, and you can see these countries consider an EMP weapon in part of their cyber domain, because the nuclear weapon, the nuclear super EMP, doesn't detonate on the ground. It doesn't kill anybody. They detonate it in space, or they detonate it 300 miles above the ground, and it doesn't kill anybody. All it does is affect computers. So in the foreign views on this, it is part of cyber warfare for them. It's not like they're taking the step from a cyber war tit for tat and now they're going nuclear. They don't consider it that way. They consider it as part of cyber warfare. So where could this all go? I pray and I hope that as soon as a city or two in the U.S. loses power, that the Biden administration is going to be like, maybe we took this a little too far. Maybe we need to reconsider what we're doing here. Maybe, hopefully there's some experts up there that can warn the administration, say, hey, this is serious. Like, we cannot win a cyber war against Russia. The Russian electric grid and their infrastructure is still built on vacuum tubes. Everything that we have is digital, microchips, small electronics. This idea that we're going to win a cyber war against Russia is not going to happen. So, yeah, this is the closest we've been to actually seeing all these things that we've been preparing for, we've been talking about. This is the closest we've been. So I would recommend everybody over the weekend here, take a big, long, hard look at your preparations. Take a look at if your city did get blacked out next week or next month, what would you do? Where would you go? Now, obviously, if it's a cyber attack and you still have access to your phone and you can see that it's just your localized area, I'm not saying you have to bug out and, go over the top with your response, but also recognize that could lead to an eventual EMP attack on the U.S. in the near future after that. But have a plan of action. Do you have the stuff in your home, flashlights, candles, food, a way to cook the food, a propane burner, and things like this, a Berkey water filter to purify water if the water system gets shut down? Do you have a plan for your latrine and a plan for, you know, where you would use the restroom in your home? It may behoove you to get out of town. If you have that ability, if you have a survival retreat, or if you have a fallback location that you pre-planned, it may make sense to load up your car and get the heck out, because it could get really bad. And it may get bad. It will get worse and worse the longer it goes. So a cyber attack could last for 3 or 4 days. It could last for 2 weeks. You don't know. It depends on how much damage they do to our system. So there's a lot of unanswered questions here, and I don't have every answer to every question, but pretty much everything that Dr. Peter and I discussed 2 weeks ago, before anybody in the media was talking about it, we're watching this stuff escalate exactly how we foresaw it playing out. And I'm not saying it's going to keep going that way, but heed the warning. Go back and watch that interview I gave with Dr. Peter. But at the end of the day, again, God is in control. His will be done. So, as always, prepare for the worst, hope for the best, and let God do the rest. Take care, everyone. God bless.